The Yamaha FZ6, everybody. Welcome back to another video on this fantastic motorcycle on this lovely day. What a view that is, do you think? Anyway, so this bike is a fuel injected one. This is a 2006 FZ6. I think they started making these in 2004. And ever since then, you seem to get this attitude now amongst drivers and riders that carburetted bikes, and cars for that matter, are nowhere near as good as fuel injected ones. So today, we're going to jump on, we'll go for a ride, and we're going to discuss, one, what the differences are between a carburetted bike and a fuel-injected one, and whether or not fuel-injected bikes really are that much better than carburetted ones. So let's jump on, and let's do this. I'm not going to lie to you guys, I tend to prefer fuel-injected bikes over carburetted ones. I have had a couple of carburetted bikes throughout my riding career. That was my first ever motorcycle, which was a Chinese bike. I'm not going to mention what that was, and the ZX9 that we had on the channel a couple of years ago. I can't believe it was already 2 years ago now. It must have been last year that we sold the ZX9. Which way should we go? Should we go this way? Yeah, let's go this way. And the main reason why I prefer fuel injected bikes over carburetted ones is because they don't need as much maintenance. Now, you know, a lot of people will probably scoff at that. Now, carburetted bikes, they don't need that much maintenance either. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that they need loads more maintenance than fuel-injected bikes. All I'm saying is that there is a little bit less that you need to worry about on a fuel-injected bike as opposed to a carburetted one. Having said that, fuel-injected bikes have got their own set of problems, all right? So it's not really a clear answer here which one is better. But when you're talking about fuel-injected bikes, I mean, what is a fuel-injected motorcycle? Alright, so a fuel-injected bike uses a computer to moderate the fuel mixture and the spark, the ignition timing of the bike. It also monitors things like the oxygen levels coming out of the exhaust to make sure that it's burning correctly. And it will also sense things like knocking and all that coming from the engine. Usually, for the most part, that's usually what a fuel-injected bike means. It's basically a computerized version of a carburetor in a lot of ways, although fuel-injected bikes, they also manage ignition timings as well. Excuse me. Whereas carburetors, they don't do that. All that carburetors do is mix fuel and air. The more you open the throttle, the more fuel it allows to come through these little pipettes. So you get more fuel, more air equals a bigger bang. Fuel injected bikes will automatically manage things like choke. So when you start the bike up from a cold start, it will automatically manage the idle RPMs, the idle revs. So from a rider's perspective, all you have to do is start it and go. You don't have to worry about putting the choke yourself, setting the choke yourself, setting the idle RPMs yourself. Oh dear. You don't have to worry about any of that. The computer will do it all for you. Now, carburetted bikes, one big flaw with them is that if they're not tuned quite right, then the bike won't run that great. It will probably run really rough. It will probably have really bad fuel economy. And, you know, it might not idle quite right, things like that. But for the most part, the difference between a fuel-injected bike and a carburetted one is that there isn't really that much difference between the two. They are near enough the same in a lot of ways. The only difference is how fuel is delivered, basically. That's it. Now, you can get different types of fuel injection. You can get direct fuel injection, you can get port fuel injection. I'm not going to get into all that. It's basically the different points at which the fuel is injected into the engine. Alright, so at which point is the fuel getting into the cylinders? That's it. So I'm not going to get into any of that. Alright, so some people would prefer one over the other or whatever. It doesn't really matter. Okay, for the scope of this video, that doesn't matter. But that is basically the difference between one or the other. Now, so I mean, the easiest way to think about it is one is analog. So carburetors are analog. Fuel injection is digital. That's the easiest way to describe or explain or differentiate the difference between a carburetted bike and a fuel injected one. is that one is analog and one is digital. One is manual, one is automatic. You know what I mean? And when I say manual, I mean pretty much with carburetors you just set it and forget it. Alright? Now one other thing I do tend to find is that fuel injected bikes, they seem to have a little bit more throttle response. Traditionally, they usually have just a little bit better of a throttle response. So when you give it the beans on the throttle, you get a better feeling of the power that's being delivered to the bike. Whereas on a lot of carburetted ones, usually speaking, not always the case, but usually they have a bit of a delay, a bit of a lag in the throttle response, whereas fuel injected bikes don't usually have that problem. But that's pretty much why I tend to prefer fuel injected bikes over carburetted ones, because one of that throttle response, the slightly better throttle response, a slightly better feel, I suppose, of acceleration and torque and all that. And yeah, you don't have to manage it, you don't have to maintain it as much as a carburetted bike. I say that, there are issues with, or there can be issues with fuel injected bikes as well, especially old ones. If you have an issue with the ECU, for example, like I'm having at the moment with my Blackbird, my Honda Blackbird, it's having an issue with the knock sensor, even though there is no issue with the knock sensor. One of you did suggest changing it anyway, even though there didn't look like there was anything wrong with it, kind of from the look of it. So I might go ahead and do that. That might be an easy fix. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, and that is also a fuel injected bike. It's a 2002 Honda Blackbird, and it has a problem with the ECU. And it's very well reported in forums and things about the issues with ECUs on Honda Blackbirds. If you have an issue with an ECU, it can be quite an easy fix. All you've got to do is buy a new ECU and replace it. However, you could run into the issue like I have done with my Blackbird, where it's got a security system in place, where there's a chip, little microchip, inside the key. And if you put the key in, and even if it matches, you know, so it unlocks and things like that, and it turns on the bike, it won't necessarily prime the fuel pump, because the ECU isn't allowing it to. And so that's the security system that's on the Honda Blackbird. I don't think that this FZ6 has any kind of security features like that, so that wouldn't be an issue for me. But there is something else to consider, that some bikes would have a security system that ties the key, the chip in the key, to the computer on the bike. So, or on the car for that matter, a similar kind of process in a car, I suppose. So you can run into those problems. You can also run into issues with fuel injectors. Fuel injectors are usually quite expensive. To be fair, I don't know how much they are on bikes, but on cars they can be expensive because, again, they're electronic units. If something goes wrong with them, they can be an expensive thing to fix. Whereas with carburetors, you don't have to worry about that. Everything on a carburetor in terms of maintenance and fixing is usually very, very cheap. And usually if a carburetted bike isn't running very good, it's not because there are any problems with the carburetor or any of its component parts, but because it's not tuned correctly, or maybe on the little pipettes and things like that. There's a little hole where it sprays the fuel, or how the fuel comes out in the vacuum, where if that is blocked by debris or old fuel, things like that, then that can cause the bike to stop running properly. So it can be a very easy thing to fix carburetors if you know what you're doing. For me, when it comes to cleaning carburetors, it's quite an easy process. I'm not that worried about it. The biggest issue I have when it comes to maintaining carburetors is the tuning. I'm not 100% kind of up to date with, I say up to date, they're an old piece of technology, but I'm not all that up to date with the tuning of carburetors. I don't know how to do it. And also things like throttle timing. Is it throttle timing? I think so. So making sure that all the throttle valves open at the same time, things like that, I don't know how to do, and I'm not familiar with it in the slightest. So, you know, little things like that is where I get a little bit afraid when I buy a carburetted motorcycle, because I don't really want to be dealing with any of that. To be fair, actually, I say that, but recently I've been more and more curious about getting another carburetted bike if it isn't running quite right, to see if I can get it running properly, see if I can fix it. So, you know, I'm curious. My curiosity might get the better of me on that one of these days. But that's usually why a fuel-injected motorcycle is a little bit more convenient to own and ride and maintain than a carburetted one. But in terms of overall performance, there is no difference. There's no real-world difference in performance between a carburetted bike and a fuel injected one, as long as it is tuned correctly. If it's got the right tune, you're doing okay. When it comes to fuel injected bikes, the tune is managed by the ECU. You don't have any control over it whatsoever, although you can do something called flashing, an ECU flash, or reflash, or whatever you want to call it, where you're basically putting a new map, a new fuel map, a new fuel and air map on the ECU. So that's why they call it mapping as well. That's another word they use to describe it. So you can adjust the fuel and the ignition timing and things like that, all through a modded ECU or a flashed ECU. So again, like in terms of the modding scene, I'm sure it probably was much simpler to mod carburetted bikes and carburetted cars rather than fuel injected one, because you don't need a computer to do it. You just need a screwdriver and a good ear to hear how the engine sounds, you know. If you can do that, then you could probably tune a carburetted bike and get more power out of it, probably a little bit easier, a little bit simpler than you could in a fuel injected one, because you got to have some expertise to know how to map an ECU on a fuel injected car or motorcycle. You've got to know what you're doing, otherwise you could seriously cause some problems on your bike. You know, you could seriously blow it up and you wouldn't be having a good time. But you know, it's just little things like that I don't really worry about for the most part. It's something I've been curious about on the H2, getting a map on the H2, but I've never really thought it's something I need to do. It's a mod that I need to do on any of my bikes. I've always been quite happy with the performance of the bikes that I've got. I mean, when you already got 200 horsepower and 140 newton meters of torque, like, why do you need any more than that? I suppose to smooth out the throttle response and to smooth out the power delivery. That's one very, very practical use case for mapping an ECU. But yeah, you guys, it's just little things like that are the differences, really. You know, we've gone into quite a lot of detail, but that's really a difference, and that's why I tend to prefer fuel injected bikes over carburetted ones. But I would never not buy a carburetted motorcycle. So if you are looking at an older bike and you see that it's carburetted, don't be afraid. If it runs perfectly good and you make sure that you keep putting good fuel in it, you know, like it doesn't have stale fuel or what have you that clogs up the carburetors, then the bike will run absolutely perfectly and you'll have nothing to worry about. That is the truth, you guys, when it comes to carburetors. There's really nothing wrong with a carburetted bike, and even when something does go wrong, a mechanic can usually fix it very, very easily, very, very cheaply, very, very quickly, and they know exactly what they're doing. And a lot of the time, mechanics prefer working with carburetted bikes anyway, because they're easier to work with. And there's lots of tutorials on YouTube and things like that about how you can do carburetors, how you can personally maintain carburetted bikes. So again, that's something you can't do with fuel injected bikes. You can't really maintain them yourself. You can get replacement parts and things, but you can't tune them yourself, and usually they're more expensive to fix because it's an issue with wiring, or it's an issue with ECU, or it's an issue with, you know, ignition coils or spark plugs, or it's an issue with bloody hell, what's the thing called? I can't remember. But yeah, you can get all sorts of issues like that on fuel injected bikes, which you don't have to worry about on carburetted ones. Carburetted bikes, they do have spark plugs as well. You know, it's I mean, I was going to say unless they're diesel, but you don't really get any diesel bikes. In cars, you get diesel cars, but yeah, diesel cars don't have spark plugs because they use the compression of the air in the fuel to generate the heat, which creates the combustion. Whereas when it comes to petrol, gasoline, you need that spark to ignite the fuel. So you do get like ignition coils and spark plugs on carburetted bikes as well, and they're managed by well, they call it points, but it's like a distributor cap. I'm pretty sure that there's another word for it for motorcycles. I can't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, for cars it's a distributor cap, and that's what controls the ignition timing of the bike or the car. So yeah, again, everything on a carburetted bike or car is very simple, much simpler than what you find these days on electronic bits and pieces that you find in a lot of modern motorcycles. But they are a little bit more maintenance free than their carburetor counterparts, but like I said, in terms of overall performance, there is no notable difference really between the two. You might get a slightly better throttle response, but then again you might get a smoother throttle response with carburetted bikes. So you know, it goes both ways, you guys. It's what you prefer. At the end of the day, it's what you prefer. I prefer a fuel injected bike, but I know a lot of riders prefer carburetted ones, and that is cool. That's good. I like carburetted bikes just as much as I like fuel injected ones most of the time. There's just small little differences between the two that for me usually would entice me to buy a fuel injected one over a carburetted one, but I'm never afraid to buy a carburetted bike, and they're fun. They're just as fun as a fuel injected bike in more cases than not. Alright, but you guys let me know down in the comment section below what you think. How do you feel about fuel injection versus carburettors? Let me know down in the comment section below, and let me know which do you prefer, or maybe I've missed something. Maybe I've missed a crucial detail about carburettors that makes them better than fuel injected bikes, or vice versa. You guys drop it in the comments and let me know down below. But as always, please go ahead, leave that like, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell down there so you don't miss any more videos from us, and drop a comment as well to help boost the algorithm. It helps get this video pushed out to more and more viewers. So if you could do that for me, I'd really appreciate it. But thanks to you guys. You take care, you ride safe. We'll catch you all in the next video. Have a good one.